Hello, dear listeners. Welcome once again to another episode here on the English Globe. Today, we are stepping into the hidden corridors of history to explore CIA versus KOBIAN, KGB, the secret spy war. This was not just a rivalry between two intelligence agencies. It was a battle for global influence that shaped the second half of the 20th century. Understanding it is key to grasping how modern geopolitics evolved.
This topic is important because the intelligence war between the United States and the Soviet Union went far beyond gathering secrets. It influenced wars, revolutions, diplomacy, and even science. The actions of the CIA and the KGB impacted leaders' decisions, altered the paths of nations, and left a legacy that still affects international relations today. Knowing this history helps us see why espionage remains a critical force in world affairs.
Before we dive in, we'd like to ask for your support. Please give this video a like, subscribe to the English Globe, and share it with friends who enjoy history and world politics. Also, tell us in the comments where you are listening from, and give us your thoughts on today's topic. We love reading your opinions and seeing the wide range of places our audience comes from. It makes our work even more exciting.
Now let's set the stage. The end of World War II in 1945 left two dominant powers, the United States and the Soviet Union. They had been wartime allies against Nazi Germany, but their partnership was based only on necessity. In truth, their political systems and worldviews were completely opposed. The United States embraced capitalism and democracy, while the Soviet Union pushed for communism and centralized control.
This ideological divide quickly escalated into what became known as the Cold War, a global competition without direct large-scale fighting between the two superpowers. Instead, the struggle played out through political pressure, economic competition, proxy wars, and, most importantly for our story, through espionage. Both nations saw intelligence gathering as essential to survival and victory.
In the United States, intelligence operations before the war had been small and temporary. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, coordinated espionage during World War II but was disbanded afterward. However, the growing Soviet threat led to the creation of a permanent intelligence body. In 1947, the National Security Act established the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, tasked with collecting and analyzing foreign intelligence and conducting covert operations abroad.
The CIA's role was strictly foreign-focused. Domestic intelligence remained under the FBI's control. From its early years, the CIA worked to create a global network of operatives and informants. It invested heavily in both human intelligence, HUMINT, and emerging technological tools. This mix of spycraft and science would become a trademark of Cold War espionage.
The Soviet Union, however, had its own long tradition of secret police and intelligence services. After the war, Soviet intelligence was under the MGB, the Ministry of State Security. In 1954, it was reorganized into the Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti, the KGB. Unlike the CIA, the KGB combined both foreign and domestic intelligence, making it responsible for protecting the regime at home and advancing Soviet interests abroad.
This gave the KGB immense power. At home, it monitored citizens, suppressed dissent, and secured the leadership. Abroad, it spied on foreign governments, recruited agents, and conducted covert influence campaigns. Its dual nature made it one of the most feared and formidable intelligence agencies in history, capable of both guarding the Soviet state and projecting power worldwide.
By the mid-1950s, the CIA and KGB stood as the sharpest instruments of their nation's global strategies. Both were convinced they were defending the future of civilization. The CIA against the spread of communism, the KGB against capitalist domination. Their rivalry would span decades, cover every continent, and involve both dazzling successes and catastrophic failures.
This competition was never just about information. It was about control, over narratives, governments, and entire regions. Both sides engaged in secret operations that often changed the course of events without the public realizing it. Only years later, through declassified files or defector testimonies, would the true stories emerge.
Europe became one of the earliest battlegrounds for this shadow war, with cities like Berlin and Vienna turning into hubs for espionage. Refugees, diplomats, soldiers, and spies all mingled there, making them perfect places for covert operations. But before we explore those tense encounters, it's important to remember that this was not a game. The stakes were life and death, and mistakes could be fatal.
Double agents risked execution. A single leak could expose entire networks. This meant the men and women who served in these agencies lived under constant pressure, often hiding their true identities even from their families. For them, secrecy was not just part of the job, it was a matter of survival.
And so, as the Cold War deepened, every scrap of intelligence became critical. The arms race, proxy wars, and technological competition meant neither side could afford to fall behind. In our next section, we will examine how this early rivalry developed into a full-scale spy race in the late 1940s and 1950s. A contest fought in shadows, where victory often came at a heavy price.
As the Cold War took shape in the late 1940s, both the CIA and the KGB began testing each other's capabilities. Europe, shattered by war and divided by ideology, became the primary stage for their early battles. In this chaotic environment, the agencies learned to adapt quickly, using a mix of human agents, covert technology, and psychological tactics to outmaneuver one another.
One of the earliest intelligence hotspots was Vienna, Austria. After World War II, Vienna was divided into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. The city's location, close to the Iron Curtain, made it ideal for recruiting agents, exchanging information, and running covert operations. Both the CIA and KGB established strong presences there, often shadowing each other's moves closely.
Berlin, however, was even more critical. The city was deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany, but like Vienna, it was split into 4 sectors. This made it a strange, tense island of Western presence in the middle of Soviet territory. Spies from both sides crossed paths in cafes, train stations, and even in official buildings. The divided city became known as the capital of spies, and it was here that some of the first major Cold War intelligence coups were won and lost.
In these early years, both sides relied heavily on human intelligence, or HUMINT. The CIA recruited informants from the Eastern Bloc, diplomats, military officers, and ordinary citizens willing to pass on valuable information. The KGB, in turn, targeted Western diplomats, journalists, and businessmen. Every foreign visitor to the Soviet Union was a potential intelligence source, and every Soviet traveling abroad was carefully monitored for recruitment or defection.
Technology was still in its early stages, but the seeds of modern espionage were already being planted. The CIA experimented with miniature cameras and covert listening devices. The KGB was no less creative. One of its most famous early innovations was the Great Seal Bug in 1945, a listening device hidden inside a carved wooden plaque of the U.S. Great Seal, gifted to the American ambassador in Moscow by Soviet schoolchildren. It worked for 7 years before being discovered.
One of the most daring early CIA operations was the Berlin Tunnel Project, also known as Operation Gold, launched in the mid-1950s. The idea was to dig a tunnel from the American sector of Berlin into the Soviet sector to tap into underground telephone cables used by the Red Army. For nearly a year, the CIA successfully intercepted thousands of conversations, gaining valuable intelligence on Soviet military planning.
Unfortunately for the CIA, The KGB already knew about the tunnel from the very start. A British double agent, George Blake, had informed them. Remarkably, the Soviets let the operation run for months, feeding only selected information through the tapped lines before discovering the tunnel in a staged public announcement. The incident showed just how deeply compromised intelligence operations could become in the Cold War's early years.
While the CIA scored successes, the KGB achieved some major victories too. One of their most effective strategies was placing agents inside Western governments. The Soviet Union's early intelligence triumphs included the Cambridge Five, a group of British spies who had passed secrets to Moscow since the 1930s. Even into the 1950s, their information gave the Soviets an inside view of Western strategy and policy-making.
Beyond Europe, the early spy race extended into Asia. China's fall to communism in 1949, followed by the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, intensified the need for reliable intelligence in the region. The CIA worked to gather information on Chinese military movements, while the KGB coordinated closely with Chinese and North Korean intelligence to track U.S. operations. These battles were often fought in remote, dangerous environments far from public view.
In these years, defectors became a prized source of intelligence. A defector could provide the names of enemy agents, operational methods, and even secret codes. However, defections were risky. The KGB had special teams dedicated to preventing them, and the CIA had to work fast to protect defectors and extract useful information before their credibility was questioned.
The early Cold War was also marked by a steady escalation in counterintelligence, the art of catching spies. Both the CIA and KGB poured resources into identifying and neutralizing enemy agents. This led to an atmosphere of extreme suspicion inside both agencies. Careers could be destroyed by mere rumors, and loyalty was tested constantly through elaborate internal checks.
While espionage was central to the early Cold War, both sides also understood the value of propaganda. The CIA secretly funded cultural projects, magazines, and even art exhibitions to promote Western ideals. The KGB ran its own influence campaigns, spreading stories designed to discredit the US and strengthen communist sympathies worldwide. This battle for hearts and minds was as important as the collection of hard intelligence.
By the late 1950s, the spy race had matured into a highly professional, complex competition. Each side had suffered humiliating failures and enjoyed stunning successes. Lessons learned in these years would shape the strategies of both agencies for decades to come. And with the nuclear arms race beginning to dominate global politics, the stakes were about to rise even higher.
In our next section, we'll focus on one of the most dramatic arenas of Cold War espionage, Berlin, and see why it earned its reputation as the ultimate spy capital of the world. From covert tunnels to tense standoffs at Checkpoint Charlie, Berlin would become the beating heart of the intelligence war between the CIA and the KGB.
If there was one city that symbolized the heart of Cold War espionage, it was Berlin. Divided into East and West, it stood as both a literal and symbolic front line between the capitalist West and the communist East. On one side, the US, Britain, and France held sectors of the city. On the other, the Soviet Union controlled East Berlin. The tension was constant, and the streets, cafes, and border crossings became the stage for some of the most daring intelligence operations in history.
Berlin's location made it a unique opportunity for spies. It was deep inside East Germany, yet the western sectors were connected to West Germany through heavily guarded corridors. This meant that while travel was difficult, it was still possible for agents, informants, and defectors to move in and out, often under false identities. The city's divided nature meant that intelligence officers from both the CIA and the KGB could operate in close proximity, sometimes literally across the street from one another.
The scale of espionage in Berlin was staggering. Western intelligence agencies ran hundreds of agents into East Berlin and beyond, aiming to gather details on Soviet troop movements, political plans, and military technology. The KGB and East Germany's Stasi countered with their own vast networks, infiltrating West Berlin society, watching border crossings, and turning Western operatives into double agents whenever possible.
One of the most famous operations in Berlin was the CIA and British SIS's joint Berlin Tunnel project, also known as Operation Gold. Launched in 1954, the goal was to intercept Soviet military communications by tapping underground telephone lines in East Berlin. Engineers dug a tunnel nearly 500 meters long from the American sector into Soviet-controlled territory. For almost a year, the tunnel provided valuable intelligence on Soviet troop deployments and political discussions.
However, as we mentioned earlier, the operation was compromised from the start. British double agent George Blake had informed the KGB about the tunnel before construction began. The Soviets allowed the operation to run for months, possibly feeding false or carefully selected information through the lines. In 1956, they staged a dramatic discovery of the tunnel, using it as propaganda to accuse the West of aggressive spying.
Beyond tunnels, Berlin was also the setting for numerous high-profile spy exchanges. Perhaps the most famous was the 1962 swap of captured US pilot Francis Gary Powers, shot down in his U-2 spy plane over the Soviet Union, for KGB spy Rudolf Abel. The exchange took place on the Glienicke Bridge, which connected Potsdam in East Germany with West Berlin. This bridge would later become known as the Bridge of Spies, because of the many such exchanges that took place there.
These swaps were more than just practical arrangements to recover captured personnel. They were calculated displays of power and negotiation skill. Each side wanted to show it could protect its operatives and secure their release, no matter the political cost. The exchanges were often tense, with armed guards, photographers, and intelligence officers watching every move.
Psychological warfare was another key element of Berlin's spy culture. Both sides used misinformation to confuse and mislead the other. Fake defectors, planted documents, and staged leaks were tools in this game. The CIA might release misleading intelligence to see if it reappeared in Soviet reports, revealing a mole. The KGB, in turn, would spread rumors to sow distrust between the CIA and its allies.
Life as an operative in Berlin could be nerve-wracking. Agents had to navigate a world where every move could be watched, every conversation could be recorded, and every relationship could be a trap. Many lived under false names, using dead drops, hidden containers in public places, to pass messages without direct contact. These dead drops might be disguised as bricks, hollowed-out trees, or even trash cans.
The Stasi, East Germany's state security service, played a major supporting role for the KGB in Berlin. They maintained one of the most extensive surveillance systems in history, with thousands of informants inside East Germany and abroad. Ordinary citizens were pressured or blackmailed into spying on neighbors, co-workers, and even family members. This web of surveillance made it extremely difficult for Western operatives to work inside East Berlin undetected.
Yet despite the danger, Berlin remained an invaluable intelligence goldmine. For the CIA, information gathered here helped Washington understand Soviet military readiness and political intentions. For the KGB, insights from West Berlin provided clues to NATO's strategies and internal debates. The sheer volume of intelligence flowing through Berlin made it a city both sides could never ignore.
The atmosphere of the city reflected this tension. Checkpoints like Charlie were not just border crossings, they were theatre stages where the Cold War played out in full view of the world. Tanks faced off, guards inspected documents with suspicion, and tourists sometimes found themselves caught up in the drama. Behind the scenes, spies crossed borders disguised as businessmen, students, or even priests, carrying microfilm or coded notes.
By the early 1960s, Berlin had fully earned its title as the spy capital of the world. It was a place where espionage, politics, and daily life were inseparably intertwined. The events here didn't just stay in Berlin. They shaped global policy, influenced Cold War strategies, and deepened the mistrust that defined the era.
In our next section, we will explore how the nuclear arms race transformed espionage. The CIA and the KGB shifted their focus toward gathering information on nuclear capabilities, missile deployments, and scientific breakthroughs. The stakes would rise from political dominance to the survival of the planet itself, and intelligence failures could mean catastrophe on a global scale.
By the late 1950s, the Cold War had entered a far more dangerous phase. The competition between the CIA and the KGB was no longer just about ideological dominance or political influence. It was about nuclear survival. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were racing to build and perfect nuclear weapons capable of destroying entire cities. In this environment, accurate intelligence could mean the difference between deterrence and disaster.
The United States relied heavily on the CIA to track Soviet nuclear capabilities, missile deployments, and research progress. At the same time, the KGB worked tirelessly to steal American atomic secrets and assess US military readiness. This was not a game where failure meant embarrassment. Here, an intelligence mistake could lead to catastrophic miscalculation, even nuclear war. The stakes had never been higher.
One of the CIA's greatest challenges was the Soviet Union's secrecy. The Soviets shielded their nuclear program behind layers of military security, closed cities, and disinformation. To penetrate this barrier, the CIA began using high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, most famously the U-2 spy plane. Flying above the reach of Soviet air defenses, or so the CIA believed, the U-2 could photograph missile sites, airfields, and military bases deep inside Soviet territory.
The U-2 program, launched in 1956, was one of the CIA's most ambitious technological undertakings. Pilots flew solo missions at altitudes over 21 kilometers, wearing pressure suits and breathing bottled oxygen. The aircraft carried advanced cameras capable of capturing images with remarkable clarity, allowing analysts in Washington to count missiles, estimate warhead sizes, and monitor military construction. For years, the U-2 seemed untouchable.
That illusion was shattered on May 1, 1960, when a U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union by a surface-to-air missile. Powers survived and was captured, revealing to the world that the U.S. had been conducting aerial espionage. The incident caused an international scandal, derailed a planned U.S.-Soviet summit, and provided the KGB with a propaganda victory. Powers would later be exchanged for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel in Berlin.
The U-2 incident was a turning point. It pushed the CIA toward satellite reconnaissance, which could gather intelligence without risking pilots. The first successful program, codenamed Corona, began in 1960. These satellites photographed vast swaths of Soviet territory from orbit, dropping film canisters back to Earth for recovery. The imagery revolutionized intelligence, giving the US a clearer picture of Soviet missile strength than ever before.
While the CIA embraced the skies and space, the KGB intensified its human intelligence efforts. The Soviet nuclear program had benefited enormously from spies in the West during the 1940s, including members of the Manhattan Project. Now, the KGB sought to maintain and expand that edge by infiltrating scientific institutions, defense contractors, and government agencies. The Soviet belief in the value of well-placed human sources remained unshakable.
One of the KGB's key strategies was to recruit agents not just for technical knowledge, but for political insights. Understanding how leaders in Washington thought about nuclear policy was as important as knowing the number of missiles. The Soviets wanted to anticipate US responses to crises and to measure how far they could push without triggering direct confrontation. This required spies close to policymakers, not just scientists.
The nuclear age also saw the rise of signals intelligence, or SIGINT. Both the CIA and the KGB invested heavily in intercepting and decoding enemy communications. Radio transmissions, encrypted cables, and radar signals became vital sources of information. U.S. listening stations ringed the Soviet Union, while the Soviets built their own global network to monitor American military movements and communications traffic.
These technological advances didn't eliminate the risks of espionage. On the contrary, the speed of nuclear decision-making meant that even a small intelligence error could escalate into a crisis. This was starkly demonstrated during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when U.S. reconnaissance flights over Cuba, including low-level passes by Air Force pilots, confirmed the presence of Soviet nuclear missiles.
The CIA's analysis of this intelligence allowed President John F. Kennedy to confront the Soviets with hard evidence. The crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, but also highlighted the absolute necessity of accurate, timely intelligence. For the KGB, the confrontation underscored the danger of U.S. surveillance capabilities and reinforced the need to keep future deployments as secret as possible.
In the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, both sides quietly acknowledged the importance of avoiding misunderstandings. Yet neither agency slowed its work. The CIA expanded its satellite programs, perfected electronic interception, and sought new ways to penetrate Soviet defenses. The KGB responded with counterintelligence measures, tighter security on its nuclear sites, and aggressive efforts to identify and neutralize American spies.
By the end of the 1960s, the nuclear arms race had locked both the CIA and KGB into a perpetual struggle for information dominance. Each agency knew that the other's next breakthrough, whether in missile technology, warhead design, or delivery systems, could shift the balance of power. In this high-stakes game, there was no such thing as too much intelligence.
In our next section, we'll see how the spy war expanded beyond Europe and nuclear rivalry into the so-called Third World. Africa, Asia, and Latin America became battlegrounds where the CIA and KGB sought to influence governments, back coups, and shape the future of entire nations. This would be espionage mixed with geopolitics, and the results would be explosive.
By the late 1960s and through the 1970s, the Cold War's front lines were no longer limited to Berlin, Moscow, or Washington. Instead, the battle between the CIA and the KGB expanded into what was often called the Third World, countries in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America that were newly independent or politically unstable. These regions became arenas for covert influence, coups, and proxy wars.
For both the United States and the Soviet Union, the stakes were high. These nations held strategic resources, military choke points, and large populations whose political alignment could tip the global balance. The CIA sought to prevent countries from falling under communist influence, while the KGB worked to promote socialist governments aligned with Moscow. Neither side admitted openly to interfering, but their fingerprints were everywhere.
One of the earliest major examples was Iran in 1953. The CIA, working with British intelligence, helped orchestrate Operation Ajax, which removed Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he nationalized the country's oil industry. Though this took place before the height of the global Cold War competition, it set the tone for future interventions. The KGB studied these tactics closely, using similar strategies in other regions.
In Latin America, the CIA's activities were extensive. Perhaps the most infamous was the 1973 coup in Chile that overthrew democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende. Declassified documents show that the CIA provided support to opposition groups and military officers opposed to Allende's policies. For the KGB, Chile's coup became a rallying point to portray the US as an aggressor against popular socialist movements.
The KGB was equally active in Latin America. In Cuba, after Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution, the Soviets poured resources into strengthening the new regime, including sending military advisors, weapons, and intelligence officers. The island became a major base for Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere, much to the frustration of the CIA, which repeatedly tried to undermine Castro's government, most famously in the failed Bay of Pigs invasion of 1961.
Africa was another key battleground. Many newly independent African nations in the 1960s and 1970s were looking for economic aid and political partners. The Soviets, through the KGB, offered military assistance, political training, and ideological guidance to liberation movements. Angola, for instance, became a flashpoint when the Soviet-backed MPLA fought against US-supported UNITA forces in a brutal civil war that drew in Cuban troops on one side and South African forces on the other.
In the Middle East, the CIA and KGB found themselves entangled in some of the most volatile conflicts of the 20th century. The United States maintained close ties with Israel and several conservative Arab monarchies, while the Soviet Union armed and advised countries, like Egypt and Syria. The intelligence battle here often involved supplying weapons, training local security services, and conducting deep political espionage to influence leadership decisions.
South and Southeast Asia were equally contested. During the Vietnam War, the CIA worked alongside US military forces to gather intelligence on the North Vietnamese, disrupt supply lines, and influence South Vietnamese politics. The KGB and Soviet military intelligence, known as the GRU, supported North Vietnam with weapons, training, and intelligence sharing. The war became a testing ground for both sides' intelligence capabilities in a high-intensity combat environment.
The KGB also made inroads in India, cultivating relationships with political leaders and intelligence services. Meanwhile, the CIA built ties with Pakistan, providing military and financial support. This rivalry came into sharp focus during the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War, when both superpowers maneuvered to protect their allies without sparking a direct confrontation between themselves.
One of the most striking examples of CIA-KGB rivalry in the developing world came in Afghanistan in the late 1970s. When the Soviet Union invaded in 1979 to support its allied government, the CIA launched Operation Cyclone, funneling weapons and money to Afghan Mujahideen fighters. This covert aid, carried out through Pakistan's intelligence service, became one of the largest and longest CIA operations of the Cold War.
The Afghan conflict showed how the global chessboard strategy could have long-term consequences. While the CIA's support helped bleed the Soviet military and contributed to Moscow's eventual withdrawal, it also empowered militant groups that would later destabilize the region. For the KGB, Afghanistan turned into a costly quagmire that drained resources and morale.
The global scope of this spy war meant that the CIA and KGB had to master cultural, linguistic, and political complexities far from their home turf. Success often depended on recruiting local agents who could navigate the environment more effectively than foreign operatives. Both agencies invested heavily in covert propaganda, spreading their ideologies through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and cultural exchanges.
By the early 1980s, the world was dotted with these proxy battlefields. The CIA and KGB's influence could be felt from Central America to Southern Africa, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the deserts of the Middle East. The global chessboard was never static. Each move by one side prompted a counter-move by the other, keeping the Cold War in constant motion.
In our next section, we'll explore the deadly art of counterintelligence, how the CIA and KGB hunted each other's spies, exposed double agents, and fought an invisible war within the larger Cold War. In this shadow world, betrayal was always a possibility, and loyalty could be as fragile as the paper on which secrets were written.
While the CIA and KGB clashed openly in proxy wars and competed for influence worldwide, an equally intense and often more dangerous battle was happening in the shadows: counterintelligence. This was the art of detecting, deceiving, and dismantling the other side's spy networks. Unlike espionage abroad, counterintelligence often struck close to home, threatening the very core of each agency's security.
For the CIA, the fear of infiltration was constant. Every overseas success risked being undone if the KGB had an inside source. The Soviets excelled at recruiting agents within Western intelligence agencies, military commands, and even allied governments. One of their key methods was the long game, spotting potential recruits early, cultivating relationships over years, and waiting until the perfect moment to activate them.
The KGB's approach to counterintelligence was deeply rooted in its institutional history. The Soviet state security apparatus, from the Cheka to the NKVD to the KGB, had always relied on rigorous internal surveillance and loyalty checks. Officers were monitored, tested, and sometimes even fed false information to see if it leaked. The culture was one of suspicion, and that paranoia was often justified.
One of the most damaging betrayals for the CIA came from Aldrich Ames. A senior counterintelligence officer, Ames began spying for the KGB in 1985, passing over the identities of numerous American assets within the Soviet Union. Many of these agents were arrested and executed. Ames's motivations were partly financial. He received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Moscow, but also rooted in personal dissatisfaction and resentment.
For the KGB, Ames was a triumph. His access gave them a map of the CYA's operations inside the USSR, allowing them to shut down American spy networks almost overnight. The scale of the damage was immense, and the fact that Ames continued spying undetected for nearly a decade highlighted vulnerabilities in the CIA's own internal monitoring.
But the Soviets were not immune to betrayal themselves. One of the CIA's greatest counterintelligence successes came from Colonel Oleg Gordievsky, a senior KGB officer who secretly worked for British intelligence, MI6. Gordievsky provided invaluable insights into Soviet strategy, internal politics, and active operations abroad. His information influenced Western responses to crises and helped prevent dangerous misunderstandings.
Gordievsky's defection in 1985 was a blow to the KGB's prestige. While the Soviets managed to bring back some defectors through persuasion or coercion, Gordievsky escaped their reach, smuggled out of the USSR by MI6 in a daring operation. His accounts later revealed just how deeply Soviet leadership feared NATO military exercises and how close they sometimes came to misinterpreting them as preparations for a real attack.
Counterintelligence also relied heavily on double agents, operatives who pretended to work for one side while secretly serving the other. These individuals were extremely valuable, but also extremely dangerous. The most skilled double agents could feed just enough truthful information to maintain their cover while subtly distorting other intelligence to mislead their supposed allies.
One of the most famous cases in this category was that of Robert Hanssen, an FBI agent who spied for the Soviets and later the Russians for over 20 years. While technically not CIA, Hanssen's leaks affected the entire U.S. intelligence community. He compromised countless operations, exposed surveillance techniques, and revealed the existence of a massive secret tunnel under the Soviet embassy in Washington.
The damage caused by Hanssen and Ames forced U.S. intelligence to overhaul its security procedures. Polygraph tests became more common, financial monitoring was tightened, and psychological assessments aimed to identify disgruntled employees before they could be recruited by foreign intelligence. Yet, no system could guarantee absolute security. Human beings, with their ambitions, grievances, and vulnerabilities, remained the weakest link.
The KGB faced its own devastating mole problem in the 1980s. Adolf Tolkachev, a Soviet engineer with access to advanced radar and missile technology, secretly worked for the CIA. Tolkachev's information gave the United States a detailed understanding of Soviet air defense systems, allowing U.S. aircraft to develop effective countermeasures. He became known within the CIA as the billion-dollar spy for the value of his intelligence.
Sadly, Tolkachev's career as a spy ended in tragedy. He was betrayed by a turncoat inside the CIA, believed to be either Edward Lee Howard or Aldrich Ames, and arrested by the KGB in 1985. He was executed the following year. His story underscored the brutal stakes of the counterintelligence game. A single breach could mean death for agents on the ground.
Counterintelligence wasn't just about rooting out moles. It also involved feeding disinformation to the other side. Both the CIA and KGB ran elaborate deception operations, planting false documents, staging fake military exercises, or leaking misleading diplomatic signals. The goal was to make the adversary waste resources chasing phantom threats, or to push them into strategic missteps.
In many ways, the counterintelligence war was the most psychologically taxing aspect of the Cold War. Officers had to live with the constant awareness that a friendly colleague might secretly be an enemy asset. This culture of suspicion took a toll, creating stress, mistrust, and sometimes career-ending false accusations. Yet, given the stakes, neither agency could afford to lower its guard.
As the Cold War moved into its final decade, counterintelligence became even more critical. With tensions rising again in the early 1980s, the fear of nuclear miscalculation returned, and protecting the integrity of intelligence assessments was paramount. A single false report, whether from a genuine mistake or planted by a double agent, could trigger a crisis with irreversible consequences.
In our next section, we'll explore how the technological revolution of the late Cold War, from advanced surveillance satellites to early computer hacking, transformed the intelligence battlefield once again. The CIA and KGB were about to enter a new era of spying, where information flowed faster than ever and where a single keystroke could be as potent as a bullet.
By the late 1960s, and especially through the 1970s and 1980s, technology began reshaping the way the CIA and KGB operated. The age of trench coats and dead drops wasn't over, but satellites, electronic surveillance, and early computer networks opened entirely new frontiers in espionage. The spy war was no longer confined to human agents. It was becoming a contest of machines, sensors, and data.
The CIA embraced reconnaissance satellites as a way to peer into the Soviet Union without risking pilot lives. Programs like Corona, first launched in 1960, revolutionized intelligence gathering. These satellites could photograph missile silos, airfields, and troop movements with unprecedented clarity. Images were captured on film, then ejected in capsules that parachuted back to Earth, a system that seems almost quaint by today's digital standards.
The KGB and its military counterpart, the GRU, quickly understood the strategic threat posed by such eyes in the sky. Soviet engineers poured resources into camouflage, underground facilities, and mobile missile launchers designed to hide from satellite surveillance. They also invested heavily in their own reconnaissance programs, like the Zenit series of spy satellites, to keep track of NATO forces and U.S. military deployments.
Electronic eavesdropping was another critical battleground. The U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, and Soviet signals intelligence units intercepted massive volumes of radio, telephone, and telex communications. Advances in antenna design and signal processing allowed for monitoring targets thousands of miles away. Wiretaps on undersea cables, bugged diplomatic offices, and intercepted microwave transmissions became routine sources of sensitive intelligence.
The KGB excelled at physical bugging operations. One of the most famous cases was The Thing, a passive listening device hidden inside a carved wooden Great Seal of the United States. presented as a gift to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow in 1945. It had no power source of its own, making it nearly impossible to detect at the time. It wasn't discovered until 1952, after years of broadcasting sensitive conversations to Soviet listeners.
As technology advanced, so did countermeasures. Both sides developed specialized teams to sweep buildings for hidden microphones and cameras, using spectrum analyzers and nonlinear junction detectors to find electronic devices. Secure communications rooms, known as SCIFs, sensitive compartmented information facilities, in the US, were built to prevent eavesdropping, with thick walls, soundproofing, and electronic shielding.
By the 1980s, the personal computer was beginning to influence intelligence work. While networks were still limited, databases allowed for faster storage and retrieval of surveillance data. This created new vulnerabilities. Information could now be stolen not just on paper, but also on floppy disks or magnetic tapes, smuggled out in a pocket. Early hacking attempts began appearing, often targeting academic or defense research networks.
The KGB's 1986 farewell dossier case illustrated how technology theft had become a central part of espionage. French intelligence working with the CIA uncovered a vast Soviet effort to steal Western industrial and military technology. In a calculated countermeasure, the US fed the Soviets flawed designs for critical systems, causing failures in Soviet projects ranging from gas pipelines to weapons development.
On the American side, one of the boldest technology operations was the tapping of an undersea cable in the Sea of Okhotsk, known as Operation Ivy Bells. In the 1970s, U.S. Navy divers placed a recording device on a Soviet naval communication line. For years, the CIA and NSA listened in on Soviet submarine operations, until the operation was betrayed by a former NSA employee, leading to its discovery.
Technical surveillance also reached into the realm of human biometrics. Both agencies experimented with voice recognition, facial identification from photographs, and even primitive attempts at gait analysis, identifying someone by the way they walked. While these tools were crude compared to today's AI-powered systems, they showed how the intelligence community was moving toward data-driven analysis.
The introduction of fiber optic communication in the 1980s posed new challenges. Traditional wiretaps on copper lines didn't work on fiber optic cables, which used light rather than electrical signals. This pushed agencies to develop sophisticated interception devices that could bend the cable slightly to siphon off the light signal without breaking the line.
One of the most unsettling aspects of this technological arms race was its potential for escalation. Surveillance satellites, for example, could double as targeting systems for nuclear weapons. Interference with these systems risked being misinterpreted as preparation for a first strike. In this way, the technological spy war sometimes brought the superpowers perilously close to open conflict.
And yet, even with satellites in orbit and microphones in embassies, human intelligence remained essential. Machines could collect vast amounts of data, but only human analysts could interpret it in the proper political and cultural context. In fact, some of the most successful operations during this period involved combining high-tech tools with traditional spycraft, a blend of silicon and shadow.
As the Cold War neared its end, both the CIA and KGB realized that the next battlefield would be digital. Early computer intrusions, encryption battles, and the race for secure communications were laying the groundwork for the cyber espionage world we live in today. The tools would change, but the fundamental contest, to know the other side's secrets while protecting your own, remained the same.
In our next section, we'll explore how the late Cold War thaw and the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union transformed the CIA and KGB from mortal enemies into, occasionally, reluctant collaborators. But the end of the Cold War didn't mean the end of spying. It simply meant the rules of the game would change. By the late 1980s, the Cold War was entering a phase neither the CIA nor the KGB had experienced before. The decades-long struggle had drained resources, shifted political landscapes, and left both superpowers facing internal pressures. Economic stagnation in the Soviet Union and a changing global order were altering the spy war's tempo. Yet neither side let down its guard.
In the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev's rise to power in 1985 brought reforms under the banners of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. These policies aimed to modernize the economy and loosen political repression, but they also forced the KGB into a complex balancing act. The agency had to adapt to new freedoms without losing control of domestic stability or the security of state secrets.
The CIA watched these reforms with both hope and caution. On one hand, the changes suggested a genuine opportunity for easing tensions. On the other, there was skepticism about whether the Soviet leadership truly intended to relax its grip. Intelligence analysts debated whether glasnost was a sincere shift or a calculated strategy to buy time while the USSR addressed its internal weaknesses.
Diplomatic breakthroughs during this period were significant. The 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, signed by Gorbachev and US President Ronald Reagan, eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies on both sides played crucial roles in verifying compliance through on-site inspections and satellite monitoring. An unprecedented level of cooperation in the spy world.
For the KGB, the late 1980s brought a reorientation of priorities. While still active abroad, more resources were directed toward countering separatist movements, political dissent, and nationalist uprisings within Soviet republics. These internal challenges began to rival, and in some cases overshadow, the traditional confrontation with Western intelligence agencies.
The CIA faced its own challenges. With Eastern European countries pushing for independence, the agency struggled to keep up with rapidly changing events. Intelligence reports often had to be updated daily as the political map of Europe began to shift with astonishing speed. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 caught many by surprise, including seasoned analysts who had long predicted a slower, more controlled Soviet retreat.
One of the striking features of this endgame period was the occasional cooperation between the two intelligence communities. In certain counterterrorism cases and in the realm of nuclear safety, the CIA and KGB exchanged limited information to prevent crises that could spiral out of control. These were not alliances in the traditional sense, but pragmatic contacts born out of mutual interest.
However, mistrust remained deeply ingrained. Even as the Soviet Union began to disintegrate, the KGB maintained extensive surveillance of foreign diplomats and journalists in Moscow, while the CIA continued to run operations aimed at recruiting Soviet officials. The logic was simple. No one knew what political faction might emerge dominant in the post-Soviet era, so information remained a critical currency.
In August 1991, a failed coup by hardline Soviet officials briefly plunged the country into chaos. The KGB was implicated in parts of the plot, further eroding its legitimacy. For the CIA, this was a moment of acute uncertainty. The possibility of violence, the security of nuclear arsenals, and the fate of long-standing intelligence assets were all in question.
By December 1991, the Soviet Union formally dissolved, replaced by the Russian Federation and a patchwork of newly independent states. For the KGB, this was the end of an era. The organization was split, with domestic security functions going to the FSB, Federal Security Service, and foreign intelligence to the SVR, Foreign Intelligence Service. Many of its officers adapted quickly to the new structures, but the global mission had changed.
The CIA emerged from the Cold War in a position of apparent victory. Its main rival had collapsed. Yet internally, there was recognition that the agency now faced a more fragmented and unpredictable world. Instead of one major adversary, There were dozens of regional crises, from ethnic conflicts to nuclear proliferation, requiring new strategies and a reallocation of resources.
The end of the Cold War also forced a cultural shift within both organizations. The decades-long narrative of a binary global struggle gave way to a more complex multipolar reality. For the CIA, that meant cultivating intelligence relationships in regions previously considered peripheral. For the newly formed Russian services, it meant navigating a world where economic survival often depended on cooperation with former adversaries.
The final years of the Cold War showed that intelligence agencies were not merely tools of confrontation. They could also serve as instruments of transition. The verification of arms control agreements, the management of nuclear arsenals during political upheaval, and the careful handling of diplomatic channels all relied heavily on skilled intelligence work.
But if the Cold War had ended, the craft of espionage had not. Both the CIA and Russia's successor agencies continued to view intelligence as a decisive advantage in the uncertain world of the 1990s. The rivalry endured, quieter in some ways, more global in others, and the lessons of the Cold War remained embedded in their institutional DNA.
In our next section, we'll explore the legacy of this epic spy war, how the techniques, strategies, and even myths from the CIA-KGB confrontation still shape intelligence work in the modern era. From cyber warfare to political influence operations, the shadow of the Cold War continues to loom large over the 21st century. The CIA-KGB rivalry left a profound mark on the world of intelligence, influencing how nations collect, interpret, and act on information even today. The Cold War proved that success in espionage requires more than technology or brute force. It demands a combination of human skill, strategic thinking, and adaptability. Every operation, whether successful or failed, offered lessons for future generations of intelligence officers.
One clear legacy is the enduring importance of human intelligence, or HUMINT. Despite advances in satellites, signals interception, and cyber tools, the CIA and KGB both relied heavily on agents on the ground who could understand local cultures, motivations, and nuances. The betrayal of agents like Aldrich Ames, or the sacrifice of people like Oleg Gordievsky, demonstrated that human lives were often the most valuable and most vulnerable assets in intelligence work.
Technological innovation was another lasting lesson. The Cold War drove incredible advancements in surveillance, from reconnaissance satellites to sophisticated electronic eavesdropping devices. Modern intelligence agencies continue to build upon this foundation, using satellites, drones, and cyber capabilities to monitor adversaries. Yet the balance between technology and human judgment remains critical, as machines cannot fully replace interpretation, intuition, or discretion.
Counterintelligence practices also shaped modern agencies. Detecting moles, double agents, and internal leaks became a science in itself. Today, security protocols, financial monitoring, polygraphs, and digital audits all trace their roots to Cold War experiences. The constant awareness that a single insider can compromise national security is a lesson that continues to inform both operational strategy and agency culture worldwide.
The global scope of espionage during the Cold War demonstrated that intelligence is not confined to borders. Proxy wars, foreign coups, and ideological influence campaigns underscored the value of understanding local dynamics. Modern intelligence work increasingly focuses on regional politics, economic systems, and social networks, a continuation of the CIA and KGB's lessons from Africa, Latin America, and Asia.
Perhaps one of the most important takeaways is the subtle art of deception and disinformation. Both the CIA and KGB mastered the use of fake documents, planted agents, and misleading communications to confuse their adversaries. Today, disinformation campaigns remain a powerful tool in cyber warfare and political influence operations, reflecting a direct lineage from Cold War spycraft.
Ethical dilemmas and human costs also left their mark. The Cold War's espionage battles often blurred moral boundaries. Spies were executed, entire networks dismantled, and political coups supported or subverted. Modern intelligence agencies continue to grapple with these questions. How much risk to human life is acceptable, and how much deception can be justified in the service of national security?
Training and institutional memory are another enduring lesson. The CIA and KGB invested heavily in education, language skills, and cultural immersion for their officers. Today, intelligence agencies maintain rigorous training programs, emphasizing both technical expertise and human skills. The ability to adapt to changing political landscapes, emerging technologies, and unconventional threats remains a key principle derived from Cold War practice.
Another legacy is the emphasis on strategic patience. Espionage is rarely about instant results. It often involves years of cultivation, observation, and analysis. The Cold War showed that even a single double agent, a single reconnaissance satellite, or a single intercepted communication could have strategic consequences, underscoring the importance of long-term planning in intelligence operations.
Finally, the CIA-KGB rivalry highlighted the interconnection between espionage and global politics. Intelligence shaped policy, influenced international relations, and at times even prevented nuclear catastrophe. Modern intelligence agencies continue to operate at this intersection of information and power, recognizing that knowledge is both a weapon and a shield in international affairs.
The lessons of the Cold War extend beyond spies and secret agents. They serve as reminders of the complexities of global strategy. Understanding adversaries, leveraging technology, maintaining human networks, and balancing risk with reward are all principles still central to contemporary intelligence work. In many ways, today's cyber conflicts, political influence campaigns, and covert operations are the modern heirs of the CIA-KGB struggle.
In our next and final section, we'll conclude by reflecting on the enduring story of the CIA versus KGB, not just as a historical rivalry, but as a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. We'll also discuss how the echoes of this secret war continue to shape both international relations and the very way nations perceive security in the 21st century.
As we reach the end of our journey through the secret war between the CIA and KGB, it is clear that this rivalry was far more than a battle of spies. It was a clash of ideologies, technologies, and human ingenuity that spanned decades and touched every corner of the globe. From high-stakes nuclear reconnaissance to shadowy double-agent networks, the story of this espionage war reflects the complexities of the Cold War itself.
What stands out most is the human element. Both agencies relied on courage, intellect, and sometimes ruthlessness. Operatives faced constant danger, knowing a single mistake could mean imprisonment, torture, or death. Yet they persevered, demonstrating remarkable resourcefulness. Stories like those of Oleg Gordievsky, Aldrich Ames, and Robert Hansen remind us of the profound impact individuals can have, for better or worse, in the world of intelligence.
Technology, too, played a pivotal role. From reconnaissance satellites to sophisticated electronic surveillance, the CIA and KGB constantly innovated to gain the upper hand. These advancements reshaped espionage, providing unprecedented access to information while also creating new vulnerabilities. Today, cyber warfare and digital surveillance are the natural descendants of the tools and techniques developed during this intense period.
Counterintelligence emerged as one of the most dangerous and critical aspects of the Cold War spy game. The hunt for double agents, the prevention of leaks, and the careful management of human resources were essential to both agencies' survival. Every mole uncovered, or every betrayal revealed the fragile balance of trust and suspicion that defined life within the CIA and KGB.
The global reach of their operations also demonstrates how intelligence is inseparable from politics. From Afghanistan to Latin America, from Africa to Asia, the CIA and KGB influenced wars, coups, and governments. Their actions often had long-term consequences, shaping regions politically and economically for decades. The Cold War was fought not only in capitals, but also in the hearts of distant nations, with spies as the invisible pawns and knights on a global chessboard.
Lessons from this era remain vital today. Modern intelligence agencies continue to study Cold War operations to understand strategy, risk management, and the interplay between technology and human judgment. The need for adaptability, cultural insight, and strategic patience, traits honed during the CIA-KGB rivalry, are as relevant in cyber operations and counterterrorism as they were in the nuclear age.
Reflecting on the end of the Cold War, it becomes clear that the collapse of the Soviet Union did not erase the practices, expertise, or culture built up over decades. Russian intelligence services inherited the techniques, personnel, and institutional memory of the KGB, while the CIA adapted lessons from its victories and failures. Both sides evolved, proving that espionage is never static. It continuously reinvents itself in response to new threats and technologies.
The CIA-KGB story also reminds us of the delicate balance between secrecy and transparency. Intelligence shaped policy, informed leaders, and at times prevented catastrophic conflict. Yet, it operated in a shadow world where moral and ethical dilemmas were constant. Decisions made in secrecy had consequences that reached far beyond the walls of agency headquarters, affecting millions of lives worldwide.
In essence, the saga of the CIA versus KGB is a testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and the persistent drive to understand and influence the world. It is a story of risk, innovation, and the unending pursuit of knowledge, one that continues to inform modern espionage and international relations. The techniques, strategies, and lessons of this era are now embedded in the DNA of intelligence agencies worldwide.
As we conclude, we invite you, dear listeners, to reflect on the immense scale and impact of this secret war. Consider the sacrifices, the ingenuity, and the sheer scope of the CIA-KGB rivalry. The Cold War may be over, but its legacy in espionage, strategy, and global politics continues to shape the modern world. Intelligence, after all, is not just about secrecy. It is about understanding the forces that shape history itself.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most fascinating and complex chapters of the 20th century. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like the video, subscribe to the English Globe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Share your thoughts on the CIA-KGB rivalry and which part of this secret war fascinated you the most.
We hope you found this exploration insightful and engaging. Remember, history is full of lessons, and the world of espionage offers a unique lens through which to understand power, strategy, and human nature. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll continue to uncover more stories from history and international affairs in our upcoming episodes.